Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week we have a Group 4 sprint at Grand Valley. That means that it's mostly high-speed sections, but there are a few little twisty bits, and the S15 Silvia is on top once again. So since there's no strategy involved, we had to find a car that could overtake in the straights as well as keep up with the S15 in the corners, and I think we found it. Let's get into it. The 650S is such a good car that I oftentimes just kind of skip over it when trying to determine what the anti-meta car is going to be, but then I have to remind myself that the anti-meta car doesn't just have to be a car that's not quite as good as the meta. As long as it's not the meta, it just has to be a car that can beat the meta, and this thing can absolutely get the job done. It was surprisingly easy to get under 154 with this car. GG Danny PH got it almost into the top 10, but not quite, and you can see that almost every single other car is an S15. There are a couple Veyrons, a few Ferrari 458s, but the S15 is very clearly the meta car. Before we get into the lap, I want you to pay attention to where I shift. If you shift about halfway up the digital tack, it's going to be just fine, and if you rev it out more, it's actually going to slow you down. Since the road curves right before the braking zone, you want to start just about in the middle so that when you do hit the brakes, you're going in a straight line. Brake right before the 200 meter board, and I like to aim right where the yellow line kind of disappears in the distance. If done properly, you can stay in third gear. I dropped down to second gear because I actually overshot it, and that's just because I started turning in a little bit early. We'd be able to get on the throttle a lot earlier, and we'd have a lot better exit speed if we did clip the apex right about after where the surface changes. Don't be afraid to go up on the exit curbing, but definitely avoid hitting the barrier. Going wide here will actually just cost you time, so just stay in the left lane. Try to tuck your tires into the little gutter right here, and right as you pass under the bridge, you're going to start turning in. Once your car stops turning in just as nicely, lift off only a little bit so you can put your tires in the gutter right here, but avoid the dirt on both sides because it will give you an instant penalty. Stay on the throttle and continue turning in. You don't have to be all the way up on the left side. Of course, that will help, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. Right before the 300 meter board, we're going to brake really, really hard, and we're going to get all the way down to second gear. You want to start turning in after you get to the 100 meter board, and I want you to stay really heavily on the brakes. Notice I'm letting the game's ABS do a lot of the work for me and not lifting off until I dip to first, then back up to second for the exit. In my experience with this corner, it's been a lot faster to just get on the throttle as early as you can and allowing the car to track out rather than trying to stay really tight to the inside. Keeping the throttle pinned as we turn in approximately at the 100 meter board, we're going to cross the yellow line, and as we cross it again, we're going to start braking and downshift to third. Continue adding more steering as you slow down, and as soon as you feel that you can make that apex, get back on that throttle. Again, being careful not to touch too much dirt, we're going to just lift off a little bit here and try to keep up all of our momentum and track out all the way to this barrier. There's some dark marks on the ground that move away from the barrier and then straighten out alongside the white line, and that's where we're going to brake. We're going to get down to second gear just so we can clip this inside apex, and I want you to pay attention to the throttle. We're not going to try to carry a lot of speed and just leave it at that. As soon as you can get back on that throttle, anytime you can sneak any amount of throttle, we're going to go for it. These brief moments of throttle rather than coasting can make a huge difference. When you get underneath that Grand Valley sign and your car's fully past it, that's our next braking point. You can use this inside curbing just a little bit to get the car to rotate, but if you hit it at a weird angle, it can make your car bounce, which can have disastrous results. It's very important you do hit that apex though, and you get on the throttle fully as soon as you possibly can. The McLaren has incredible grip coming out of that corner. This next sequence is another place where I lost a lot of time. Get your car as far to the right as you can, and you're going to brake right as you hit that 100 meter board. We're not going to use 100% brake here. We're just going to use enough that we can continue turning without understeering. Get yourself down to second gear, and then back up to third before you get on the throttle, which is going to be exactly when you hit the apex. Avoid the dirt though, because you'll get dirty tires and you'll lose a lot of momentum. You don't want to go super wide here, just about to the middle of the track, and turn in early. I used second gear just to get the car to rotate. On second thought, that might not have been the best idea. Just some smooth braking and steering could have probably gotten the same thing done. You'll notice on exit that I didn't have to steer a lot, which meant that I probably slowed down too much. I could have gotten on the throttle a lot earlier. Just that whole entire sequence could have been done better. Stay in fifth because every up and downshift is going to waste time. Brake at the 100 meter board, get down to third gear, but don't start turning in until you get into the tunnel. I think you could probably stay in third gear. I went down to second just so I can get on the throttle without pushing too wide, but I hit this inside curb and it actually made me slide a little bit, so we lost some more time right there. If you do end up staying in third gear, I do suggest dropping down to second gear to use compression braking rather than your brakes. I think it's probably a waste of time to slow yourself down enough to get all the way up to the right wall, but if you notice this sign right here, make sure you're turning in before then. A perfect exit here would be barely touching the curbs, in third gear, and full throttle without lifting at all for this next right-hander. Touching those cones even a little bit will give you an instant penalty. I've even received a penalty just going too high on the curb without touching the cones. The dirt here kind of runs off onto the track, so be careful because you can't see where the hard edge of the track is, and if you go over it, it's going to suck you into that wall. The rest of the lap is full throttle. Make sure you're shifting it about halfway on the digital tack, and when you get to this point, make sure you use this curb on the inside so you can minimize the amount of steering that you do. If you're all the way on the exit curb, you can actually drop into the dirt, so make sure you edge yourself just a little bit onto the middle of the track before you get out of the tunnel. There we go. As you know, it's super important to stay towards the middle of the track so you can brake in a straight line when you line yourself up all the way on the left side. And notice that I turn in just a little bit before the 100 meter board. That's why I kind of understeered and missed the apex here. Since the track is pretty wide, you can actually apex a little bit earlier than you might think. And as you're going through here, avoid going all the way to the right, it just wastes time. Make sure you're doing your best Takumi impersonation, use those gutters to get the car to rotate, but avoid the dirt. It's okay if you can't really hug the left side as long as you aim for the left so you're making use of as much track as you can while you're turning in. I kind of missed the apex there, but there's also a little bit of a dip, so sometimes if you do hit that apex perfectly, it can actually unsettle your car. On this left-hander, focus on using the brakes more just to transfer the weight forward rather than slow the car down too much, because if you use too much brake, you're just going to understeer. Every moment you can, hustle that throttle. Get on that throttle in between any of these corners that you can rather than just letting your car coast. It can make a huge difference in the end. You want to make sure that we're not understeering here, so don't use full brakes. Your brakes are obviously going to be used to scrub off speed, but it can also ensure that you've got enough weight over the front tires to maintain your line and focus on your exit here. This is another corner where the exit curve is really friendly, but make sure you get back to the middle of the track before that barrier jets out. Anytime you're going really fast into a relatively slow corner, you want to make sure you're delaying your turn in so you scrub off enough speed. If you try to turn in while you're going too fast, then you're just going to understeer. When you turn left here, you want to imagine that that is the only corner. This right-hander is just part of the straight, so you want to be on the throttle in third gear throughout that entire exit. You don't want to have to lift off on that right-hander because it's just going to cost you a lot of time. Make sure you're focusing on your line going through the tunnel and you're shifting at the correct time, and you'll have a good result. This tunnel section is really important for the race, and it's where the S15 shines. I think the McLaren does a really good job battling it, and I think I did a good job of showcasing what it can do, so let's get into it. I tested a lot of cars before deciding on the McLaren, and initially, after driving it, I thought maybe it was just too good. I came to the realization quickly after that, like I said earlier, that finding the anti-meta car isn't about finding a car that's not necessarily very good and figuring out how to beat the meta car with it. It's figuring out a car that isn't the meta car that can beat the meta car, and the McLaren surely does get the job done. I spent the majority of the first lap just trying to be cautious and just seeing how the race was going to unfold. I found on the very beginning of races, people are extra defensive, so someone who I might be able to easily pass in a one-on-one situation is going to defend a lot when it comes to trying to stay with the pack. On this track, the back straight is a really good place to pass people because you're usually able to pass in the straight, which means that you don't lose any kind of time trying to pass people going into any of the slower corners, and you can stick with the rest of the pack. As you can see from this, the McLaren is incredible when it's in the slipstream. The Silvia, 458, and the Veyron are the only other cars that are in the top 100, or at least they were when I made this video. As you can see, we passed both the Ferrari and the S15 on the straight. Not knowing what the S15 driver was going to do, I made sure to give him space, but because I had the outside line, I was able to get on the throttle earlier, and we ended up passing both of the other fastest cars. The Veyron has quite hilariously been super slow when it comes to the last few iterations of the BOP, but it looks like they fixed that, and the fastest car in the world can actually act like it now. I thought that I'd completely gotten rid of the Ferrari and the S15, but looking in my rear view, I got really lucky. I tried to slow down and avoid him, but I didn't even need to because he hit the wall before he got to me and bounced off between myself and the S15. The S15 is super annoying because it handles incredibly well on top of being incredibly powerful. One way you can really fight the meta car regardless of what car you're in is making sure that you can hit the really difficult parts of the track really well. It's funny that I completely missed the apex as I was saying that, but if you looked in the rear view just now, you might have noticed the S15 going into that wall trying to keep up with me. When you're following a car into a penalty zone and it's gotten a penalty to serve, a lot of times it just makes a lot of sense not to put up any kind of threat, unless they're really slowing you down. But either way, you want to follow them into the penalty zone, and you would usually want to avoid going through them. A lot of times people will pull off to the side, but there have been some incidents where you try to go through a ghosted car and either it unghosts at an unexpected time or the ghost is still solid. It's been a really long time since that's happened to me, but it has happened. Like I said in the track guide itself, it's incredibly important to make sure that you get that exit down. If you just focus on 1 or 2 corners on this entire thing, make sure that that one is your priority. If you can get a better exit than any car that's in front of you, you're going to be able to use the slipstream, and as long as you're not in an incredibly weak car, you should be able to pass. I don't think I had to pass a Veyron, but I'm pretty sure the McLaren can do it. Not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it could. Passing on the outside and defending on the outside both have their advantages, but if you don't trust the person, then it's really tough to want to put yourself on the outside. Passing on the inside is good too because you can kind of dictate the line. If you brake just a little bit later than people expect you to, as long as you don't slide off the apex, a lot of times people are going to try to slot in behind you and try to pull off the old switcheroo. If you just make sure you get a really clean entry into the corner and a really good exit, then you shouldn't have too much to worry about. It probably would have taken me at least to the end of this lap to catch up to these two, but if you look really closely, the BMW was squeezing the Veyron so much that the Veyron had to brake in the dirt, and that caused him to slide directly into that BMW. Now, the BMW probably didn't mean to put him in the dirt, because everyone would know that that would mess up the Veyron, at least mess up his braking, and then something like that could happen, but who knows. The Veyron then just continued, and if you look at the chat, you can see that the BMW driver wasn't happy. I hope he looked back and saw that it was his squeezing that caused that to happen, but either way, racing incidents happen. You can't really underestimate the Veyron because it's incredibly heavy. It is definitely really heavy, but the all-wheel drive system and in the right hands can still be formidable even in the twisty section. But no matter how good it is, it's definitely not going to be quite as good as a McLaren or an S15 or anything like that, so you should be able to keep up with them, at least in the twisty bits. My focus this time was to stay as close as I could and then be really aggressive on the overtakes, hoping to get in front of him or at least annoy him enough that I could stick with him before the last straight. I was going to try to pass because on the off chance that I could get behind the S15 after the next little twisty section, then hopefully he would be slow enough through there that I'd be able to lose him. But it didn't look like I could make that happen. If you look at the delta, you can see that since I took that wider exit, I was able to keep up with him and actually get close. I didn't think I was going to go for a pass there, and I'm really not sure what happened. It looks like he just kind of pulled over. When he first hit that BMW, he pulled over, and then he kind of signaled to pull back. I think he might have thought that I was going to be able to catch him a lot easier, and then I couldn't. I get the feeling he was just pulling over so he could give the position back to the other guy, because despite the fact that it really wasn't his fault, it wasn't intentional, he probably still wanted to give the position back because that guy didn't know that it wasn't intentional. Either way, thanks to the 3-car battle ahead of me, I was able to get really close before the back straight, and then using the slipstream, I got even closer. It looked like the guy directly ahead of me was really patient. He let those two battle, and it looks like he's just looking for his time to strike. No matter what level you're at when it comes to the daily races, things can get pretty sketchy when you've got 3 of the meta cars battling pretty heavily, especially going from a really high speed section to a very, very slow hairpin. A really common thing you see is when people are going for a late break here, the other car that they're battling will collide with them or vice versa, and if you unsettle these cars even a little bit under braking, their braking power is going to be really, really greatly reduced, and it's going to end up in them sliding into the people ahead. This is why it's really important to make sure that everything you're doing looks deliberate and people know your intentions. If you're going to go for some kind of dive, make it really obvious. Now, I couldn't tell you what happened there, but regardless of what happened, I was now really close to both these S15s. And we've got lots of different options in these scenarios. If I were to pass this first guy right now, then I could hope to stay in the slipstream of the guy ahead, maybe even work with him, giving him a bump draft on that back straight so that we could both work it together to get away from this guy that I'm trying to pass. If we battle too much, the front guy could get away, but none of that really happened. What happened was I tried to pass on the inside here, he had the slipstream, and so he was really easily able to stay with the other car. That penalty does mean free position, however, we had just passed the penalty zone not that long ago, so we had almost an entire lap to deal with this guy still, and anything can happen in a whole lap. So I went really wide and just focused on the exit. We've got the meta car following another meta car, so he's got the benefit of the slipstream, which means he's going to go very fast. But the McLaren, the anti-meta car this week, is definitely chosen for this reason right here. It can stick with the meta car in the slipstream of another meta car. Now with these two jockeying for position, if they were going to make any moves, I should be able to capitalize it. If not, at the very least, just stick with them. Now I don't know really anything about these two guys, but watching them, it was pretty clear they both had pretty good control, and they definitely had the courtesy to not run directly into each other. This car haul guy was smart enough to give extra space because Ram Sausage actually missed the apex, but they didn't even collide. And seeing that, I knew that if I went for some kind of move, I'd have the space. So I went for it. It's funny that their cleanliness was their downfall. Because I trusted both of them so much, I knew that if I made a really aggressive move, then I was going to have the space to do it. And because of that, I was able to get both of them on that corner. It's hilarious because if I didn't trust them, I just wouldn't have gone for that move, and they might have actually been able to hold me off for longer. I actually talk about that a lot in these videos and on my stream. It's really hilarious that you can actually be more vulnerable because you are more well respected and have a better reputation. Jumping ahead just a little bit further, I want to show how important it is to choose when you want to battle. They were just about 0.8 of a second behind me going into that tunnel, but one of them overshot, maybe both of them overshot it, trying to defend or attack too hard, and because of that, now they're at 1.2 seconds behind me. That means they don't have the benefit of the slipstream, which means now, especially if they keep fighting, I'm just going to be able to get away. Since they're in the OP car, they're in the meta car, they probably could have been more patient, and if they stuck with me, they'd be able to continue trying to fight me and continue trying to pass me and maybe even beat me in this race, but I never saw them again. Thank you once again for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and consider following me on Twitch, TikTok, and Instagram. I am also the creator of the GT7 Mythbusters series, and I stream 4 days every week on Twitch. Have a good one.